Now, when it comes to Fannibal Fest 2, I don't have a bunch of information, and I definitely tried to look for it, but I couldn't find it anywhere. The only thing I have is the Kickstarter and my memory of the event, plus maybe a few tweets here and there, and what is on the website since they never bothered to update it after 2018. I do know that for the second Kickstarter, they asked for around $17,000, and they somehow managed to get $41,000. Yet, at the same time, they had way worse everything. The dinner was worse quality. The breakfast with daddy thing was really bad, and I covered that in my last video. And when it came to getting guests for Fannibal Fest 2, they were only able to get 3 cast members. They were really grasping at straws for who they could bring in, and one of the people was somebody who made a cake for a Hannibal promotional event in season 3. She didn't work on the show. She wasn't in the show. She wasn't part of the cast. She had nothing to do with the production of anything. She made a cake for a promotional news segment for a Canadian news station, and that's who they decided to have as one of their guests. That is like the grasping at straws mentality this convention had. The other guests were not really of note or people that you would typically go to a convention to meet. They had a hairstylist, some stunt coordinators, a set designer, and the only other person of note that maybe is worth mentioning was one of the directors. And I think he only directed a few episodes of Hannibal, and he is a well-known, famous director, but they padded the roster of the convention with a whole bunch of technical people, and they kind of tried to tout it as like a technical special effects convention thing and make it sound really great when it actually wasn't. And you could tell just by the setup and design and the feel of this that they were just terrible with the money that they were bringing in. As I had mentioned, when they did the first Fannibal Fest, they said that if it was successful, the second one, they would need less money in the Kickstarter and tickets would be cheaper. As you can see on the Kickstarter, they asked for more money. And though I can't prove it, I can assure you that tickets were definitely more expensive. They weren't vastly more expensive, but from what I remember, they were about $10 to $20 more than the original tickets. And people did complain about it, but not as many as you would expect, and not enough to cancel the convention. Another thing that they offered was some sort of group activity where you could build your own flower crown. Now, all of this would have been very fine, except for the fact that I think they charged like $20 or $30 for materials for you to also be able to build a flower crown when you could just do it for cheaper at home. But you had to buy this crafts package to be able to build one, and it was just like, you're charging, like $200, $300 just to get in the door. You're charging a couple $100 more for the bus tour, which is basically the same as the last year. I think maybe they added in a few more stops. And then you want to charge for this dinner, which was $150 something, and this breakfast, which was like $40 to $60, if I recall correctly. And now you want people to pay this ridiculous fee to make a flower crown at this convention, when you just got $40,000 on your Kickstarter, where you promised the year before that you would be asking for less money and tickets would be cheaper. It was just one of the most insane things I've ever seen. And the fact that they didn't get sued or people didn't demand refunds, and they looked at these products and they looked at this convention, they said, yeah, this is totally worth the $1,000 I spent to come and do this, is baffling to me. I mean, I don't know what the mentality behind this was, other than at the time when I was initially in the Hannibal fandom. I do know that if anyone tried to out a scammer or say that something was a scam or they had been scammed, and it was more than just me because I saw it happen a lot, but if anybody tried to expose anything like this, they would basically be run out of the fandom with hate. And people became terrified to speak up about being scammed because of this. Even if they were totally scammed, they didn't want to say anything because they knew they'd get a whole bunch of death threats and they'd be harassed forever for trying to say, hey, watch out for this scam artist. It not only happened to me, it happened to a ton of people. I saw it happen over and over, and it was just bizarre because it was like, this is literally the best fandom to scam people in, because if you complain about it, you will get hated on. And I was just like, there were so many times where I thought, you know, if I wanted to run a scam and I wanted to like get people's money, I could so easily do it because nobody's allowed to complain. Nobody's allowed to say anything. I don't know if it's still like that now, but back then, which would have been 2013 to around 2016 or 17, that was a mentality, especially on Tumblr, that you were not allowed to say anything about being scammed. Now, when it comes to Fannibal Fest 3, when they announced that they were going to be doing it, they also, if I recall correctly, made an announcement that they wouldn't be able to have any celebrity guests or the bus tour or anything that made the first two conventions enticing to the minimal amount of people that it was enticing to. And people were like, okay, so you want us to pay the same exact amount as the first two conventions, but have less things to do and not meet anybody on the cast and not get autographs. And it was like absolutely ridiculous that they started with these big ticket events and big ticket items, and they were on their third convention and they were basically saying, you're gonna have to pay the same price for doing absolutely nothing. As you can imagine, this did not go over well with any of these people because they were like, yeah, we're not gonna pay like $1,000 to come in to Toronto and not meet any guests from Hannibal and just kind of sit around in a hotel, because nobody was gonna do that. Then I guess they kind of got lucky on not having to make a decision because COVID happened and lockdown happened and they weren't allowed to have a convention anyway. I do know that this led to some kind of thing where they wanted to have like a Zoom convention, but they also wanted people to pay for that, which was ridiculous because Zoom is free and there is no fucking reason anybody should be paying for a Zoom convention, but they did want that. I also think they may have gotten some sort of Zoom meeting with one of the cast members or Brian Fuller, something like that, and they wanted people to pay to attend that as well. It was just, there was a point where I know that Betsy went into a lot of debt. The reason as to why is still up for grabs because of the fact that it is entirely possible that the IRS caught on to the fact that she was filed as a 501c3 but wasn't a charity and they audited her, or it was just personal debt that she went into trying to make this convention happen. And what I don't know or understand is that conventions are for profit. That's why people run them. But she wanted to run hers as a charity. I don't get what her plan was here, because the reason you run a convention for profit is that when you get a profit, you're able to take those profits and the next year you make it bigger and better. That's how conventions grow. So either she really was trying to defraud the government with a tax scam thing, or she was just a massive fucking idiot. I am so confused as to why anybody would file a fan convention as a charity, even if it was a quote-unquote social club, because you can't keep any profits that way. And it is just, so I don't know what happened. I know that Betsy did say something about being in a lot of debt, and then I know that she was trying to sell everything not nailed down to recoup this debt and get out of debt. But at the same time, her Twitter went private and there was not more information to be known about this subject. Around 2022 is when their Twitter just stopped updating, even though they stopped updating their website in 2018 for whatever reason. And I think they stopped doing everything entirely. I don't think there's any intent to bring Fannibal Fest back. I certainly hope not. But that was kind of the story of how this fan convention ran twice for 2 years and was an absolute scam. They got away with it. Nobody complained about it, and everybody just, I guess, forgot that it happened. If it was me personally, I would be pissed off if I paid that much money for that experience, but since nobody's allowed to complain in the Hannibal fandom, or that was the mentality back then, Betsy and the rest of her committee pretty much got away with everything that they were doing. Now, if you think this is bad, wait until my next video about the Hannibal fandom musical, which is still going on today, bizarrely enough, 7 years later. They're still stringing people along. But there's a lot to cover in that, so I'm not sure if it'll be one video or a couple of videos. It is probably one of the most laughable scams and cringe-worthy things I have seen come out of this fandom, but prepare yourself, because if you thought that Fannibal Fest was the scam of the century, you have no idea what is coming.